Hey everyone, welcome to the Convocation Unscripted Live. We do this once a month, and this is the place where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, Jamar Tisby, joined as always by Diana Butler Bass.
Hey, it's good to be here today. I love our live shows.
Same here. And we also have Kristen Dumay
Hey, Jamar. So good to see you.
and Robbie Jones.
Hey, everybody.
We are three scholars. We are four scholars. Sorry.
I
Somebody
know
figure
who's
out
going to get
who's not
left
the
out.
scholar.
Hmm.
Three historians and a sociologist.
And a
Who's the
wannabe
one left
scholar.
out?
Yeah, that's all right.
That's all right. You get the spotlight today. We've got some really interesting data from you. Well, anyway, we explore how religion shapes America's past and present. We don't know exactly what's coming or who's going to say what. There's no prep, no script, so it's just raw, unfiltered conversation. That's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted, and it's live this month, and this episode is officially in session. So normally we kick things off and we just kind of go around the horn and say what we've been up to. I'll start this time because I've been in three time zones in like 5 or 6 days. So I flew to Los Angeles to meet up with the Asian American Center folks from Fuller Seminary. Then we drove 4 hours north to a place called Manzanar. It's a national historic park, and it is the site of a Japanese internment camp. What's a black guy doing going to Manzanar with the Asian American Center? I strongly believe that in general, we need to have solidarity across racial and ethnic lines, and that would include racial and ethnic minorities by the numbers in the United States. And so part of it was me just wanting to learn. And another part is I want to be able to highlight some of these things in May, starting tomorrow. It's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So that is coming up, and I wanted to be able to just share some information and some history, some really cool intersections there. Then from there, flew to Houston, where we have our quarterly Pass the Mic podcast retreat. I'm on not one, not two, but three different podcasts. I'm on the Convocation Unscripted, I'm on Pass the Mic, and I have my own podcast, Footnotes. But this one, Pass the Mic, we've been doing it 12 years. 12 years. And so we get together every quarter, we pack it in, we do 8, 10, 12 episodes, but we work hard and we play hard. So we got some great food. And then last night, we had a meetup at a restaurant that also has darts. It's like set up, it's a real dartboard, but it's set up for like electronic scorekeeping, almost like bowling is today. And so you can get on there and you have your food, but then in between, you go play darts. And we had a meetup from of Pass the Mic listeners, and we got to meet people in real time. So we know what that's like on the Convocation Unscripted when we've been on tour. It's always a blast to meet people in real life, in person, when you've only been talking to folks on a mic. So that's what I've been up to. And I literally just got off the plane, hopped here. And if you see me wiping my brows because my co-hosts make me nervous. No, I'm just kidding. It's because the AC is out. I'm upstairs and it's 80 degrees outside. So I don't know how hot it is here and I don't want to know. But that's what I've been up to. Kristen, you're on my screen right now. So what have you been doing?
Oh my goodness. Nothing compared to you, Jamar. I've just been, slacking over here in Michigan. Nothing much to report. Let's see. The big thing that I've been working on is this Saturday, our Free to Be Faithful event here in Grand Rapids, which started as a very humble idea of maybe we could hang out at a pub and just, gather some kindred spirits together. And then now we're looking at between 2 and 3,000 people participating in person and online. And I will have the kind of last update and invitation on my Substack tomorrow. And so you can follow along there and please join us. And one of the things we're really going to be pushing for that is watch parties. We want to build community. So this is a perfect excuse to grab a friend, a neighbor, somebody you think might be a kindred spirit, and just have them over, have some good drinks, some food, and tune in. And Nick Waltersdorf and I are going to be in conversation. If you don't know Nick, he is one of the preeminent Christian philosophers in the world. And he's also a friend of mine, and he is a beautiful soul. And I just was over at his place yesterday, and we were chatting about this. And honestly, I just wanted to grab like so many snapshots of sentences, phrases he was saying, and his idea is just absolutely beautiful and inspiring. So I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. And we have something kind of exciting to announce of what we're going to do next, and what we hope to, have. This is going to be a movement, so you're all invited to that on this Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Otherwise, what I've been up to, honestly, just being a mom. And this is the end of the school year. My goodness, I have a son graduating from high school, and a daughter with a birthday coming up. And so I've been doing spring cleaning and all those sorts of things. And it's actually been a really good rhythm. The house is clean. The landscaping looks better than it has in years. And so that's also the season of life that I find myself in. Yeah.
And we see the flowers behind you. Special occasion?
Well, they're still left over from last week, Jamar, our birthday week.
Very
So
good.
Oh, yeah,
they're a
Yes.
there you
little
go.
wilty, but I thought, they're little colors still.
Looks great. Sounds good. Robbie, what's been going on your way?
Well, I've been pretty much chained to the desk the last couple of weeks. So some of you may have seen, I know all you know, but we at PRRI, you know, dipped our toe in the pool of the mass onslaught of polling you may have seen around Trump's 100 days. So we were in the field much of February and March, and then between March and yesterday, we're just grinding it out, trying to get the numbers crunched. And so I've been staring at percent signs and columns and crosstabs and charts and all of that. I've been very much in quantitative mode over the past couple of weeks, but happy to say we had the new survey out. We'll talk about that more in substance when we kind of dive into what's it. I will give one Nick Waltersdorf shout out though. He was one of the early endorsers of my very first book back in 2007. That was actually my dissertation. It was like very, very generous blurb. It was out by University of Notre Dame Press. But yeah, I'm very grateful for him from way back when.
And he can say
Beautiful.
he knew you when.
He
I'll bring
launched
that
your New
up.
York
I'll bring
Times
that up on
career.
Saturday.
Oh yeah, you should tell him hello. I haven't talked to him in a very long time. But
I will. I will do that.
Yeah.
And of course, Diana, you are always ministering to folks in exotic locations, doing incredible work. What have you been up to this time?
Well, I had the Geeky Historian from Heaven weekend in Boston this last
That's
weekend.
great.
It was so fun. My daughter's getting ready to go off to law school, so I took her with me on this weekend trip up to Boston. And boy, she is the most patient 20-something-year-old, I got to tell you, because our first stop was the Congregational Library and Archives, where I'm actually on the board. And we spent, I think, 2.5, maybe 3 hours in this library, which is right across from the Massachusetts State House on Beacon. And it is a collection of more than, I think, 250,000 books, and just a huge, massive collection of manuscripts covering 400 years, primarily of congregational history. So, like, we walked into the stacks at one point where there are 15,000 sermons. And these are sermons that are manuscript sermons. And some of this material is cataloged and archived, and very little of it is digitally available. They're working on this right now. And then some of it is just a treasure trove. It's like one of those great old searches where a historian will go into a library and just start digging and does not know what they're going to find. So it was just wonderful. And my daughter loved it. And we were crawling through these old stacks and just pulling books down and looking at all kinds of interesting things. And the Congregational Library has right now a small exhibit very well curated but small exhibit of called Sacred Rebellion.
Mm.
And what it's
Hmm.
all about is it's a collection of sermons, poetry, and hymns that were written mostly by Congregationalists in Connecticut and Massachusetts during the Revolutionary War. And so, like, there was a poem written by a woman who lived in Lexington who witnessed, or no, this was she lived in North Boston, and she witnessed the Battle of Bunker Hill, and she wrote a poem about it. And of course, there's all this religious language. And then there was a hymn book written by another woman who wrote even a hymn about Lexington and Concord, and then also about the Tea Party. And it it was just amazing. One of my favorite pieces that was in the collection was I mean, this is true geek stuff. A congregational minister who nearly got fired from his job because his congregation protested that he wasn't preaching enough about politics from the pulpit. And so I want to start a new movement based on that congregation. This is my dream come true, is that somebody would get fired for not preaching about politics. And so that was really just amazingly fun. And at the very end of the exhibit, after taking you through all this incredible material by pastors and poets, and there was a Phyllis Wheatley like first edition, I mean,
Mm.
just amazing stuff. um the last exhibit is how the next generations of Americans betrayed the sacred promise of the revolution. And so in that final case, there was a first edition in absolutely pristine condition of Jamar, Do Not Faint. Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of
Ooh.
July.
And we can, was that on sale?
Well, I asked them, and they said the last one that went up for sale was not in pristine condition, and it sold for $163,000.
Okay, so do we have a donation link we can drop in the chat?
I know that's what I
Wow.
said. I said to the librarian, I said, "Don't turn around, because I'm gonna take this. If I could get in that case, that would be going home with me." And it was really, I mean, that was my first reaction, but my second reaction was I got very teary, and it was like actually being close to a holy relic. It was a beautiful copy of that amazingly important thing, and the way they had it sort of framed up as Douglas demanding that people live up to the promise of the revolution. It was I loved the whole thing. I I urge you, if you live around New England, go and visit it. It's only on display, I think, through June 30th. So this is a kind of a spring event to coincide with the 250th anniversary of 1775, which was a
Mm.
very important year in Massachusetts. So that was great. And then that same evening, I preached at Old North Church in Boston, got up in their massive pulpit, felt like I was, if I fell out, I would have died. I mean, literally, it was the highest pulpit I've ever been in my entire life, and that's saying something, because I preached at the St. Paul's in London, which is an incredibly high pulpit, but this one was higher. And so that was, it was about environment, a revolution of environmental leadership, about the sun, about solar energy, and there were all kinds of wonderful people from different faith traditions there. And it was just a great evening, and at the end of it we lit the steeple of Old North Church green.
Mm.
And Michelle Wu, who is the mayor of Boston, she gave the final speech, and she was in the low pulpit. I got the high pulpit. She was in the lower pulpit, and she pushed the button to turn the steeple green. We all had little green candles inside of the church. But what I didn't know, and I'm not sure Bill McKibben actually knew it until it happened, is that when she pushed that button, not only the steeple of Old North Church turned green, but every bridge in Boston was lit up green, and all of the major government buildings. And so we left Old North Church and didn't get on our horses, but we got in Ubers. And We rode off into an uncertain night, uh, warmed by the beacons all over the city of Boston, shining green for a revolution for the future.
We sort of kid around with Diana and we call her the Forrest Gump of Christianity because she is like everywhere cool and historic. And this is yet another example. And I just want to remind folks like the reason why we start with this updates things, one, to remind everyone we're human, we're not just scholars, we don't just live on microphones and screens, and two, that there's life outside of the political crisis that we're in. Not that it's not important or anything like that, but that we shouldn't let this regime steal our joy, steal the richness and the colors of life. And we just want to share that with you all. A lot of folks hop on here to feel a sense of hope, connection, community, refreshing, and this is why we do it. It's not just we're vamping until we get to the topic of the day. But speaking of, we always look forward to when the Public Religion Research Institute comes out with a new report because we get all kinds of numbers and all kinds of data, and we have these impressions of what's going on. But what PRRI does, what Robbie does, is to make that more concrete, make it quantitative, and give us a clearer picture of what's happening by the numbers. So, Robbie, tell us what this latest report is.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jamar. Diana, when you were talking about, that process and what historians and all of you do, the real historians in the room, digging through the archives and blowing the dust off of things, and sometimes you just look at the thing that's adjacent to the thing that you're actually thought you were looking for, and you find something really interesting, right? Like that kind of thing. There's a similar sort of process that occurred to me that like happens whenever. So we get this big data set. So what's a data set, right? So it's basically a big, huge spreadsheet that's got. So in this case, it's got 5,000 people, 5,300 people that we talked to in this last survey, and each person is a row in the spreadsheet. And then we have, say, 70 questions that we ask each person, and each column is the question, right, that we ask them, and in each little cell is their answer, right, to that question. And then our job is to sort of like sift through all of that and look for the patterns, right, that kind of make meaning out of all these individual responses, and how do they aggregate up, and how do we understand what they are. So it always feels to me like that joy you were talking about, like it's Christmas morning, right? When we get the data, and you can sort of like open up, the sheets, and I thought I would just for kicks, for those of you who are here, this is what it looks like. Right, in this raw form, like, so here we are. Like, here's a question. Here's like all the religious groups. Here's what they agree, disagree, and like all these little letters on here are whether it's significant compared to the column next to it or not. So so that you're not making any untoward assumptions. Anything in red has got a smaller sample size, so you probably want to be careful about any kind of things you're going to talk about that. But like, there's a real care, and this is just one question, right? And this is one question by religious groups here. But in any given breakdown, there's one page per, so 70 some odd pages. That's just the religious breakdown. There's 70 some odd pages for the political breakdown. There's 70 some odd pages for the demographic breakdowns. Like, so you kind of go through each one of these things. And so, there's a whole day of just like, going through these things and kind of, oh, that's interesting, and kind of making a whole set of notes about like what to kind of look for, and then trying to make meaning out of all the patterns at the end of the day. So I'll just start with a couple things. We, like everyone else, are finding, I think, some hope in that uh, people are concerned about the directions Trump is taking the country. His favorability rating is down the low 40s, and that is as low as anybody not named Trump has been at this stage of their presidency since Dwight D. Eisenhower. Right. So, I mean, that's significant. That the country is responding, I think, in many ways to what they're seeing across the board. We're finding also very, little support and a lot of opposition to some of the key Some of the key things like tariffs, attacks on birthright citizenship, kind of many of the executive orders. Almost all the ones we tested is 2-to-1 opposition to what he's to the kind of power grabs and all of that. One thing I'll highlight here that I guess two I want to pause on that are like the ones that I always do this too. Like whenever I'm kind of digging through all this stuff, you're just on overload. You've got hundreds of pages of these crosstabs, and you've got like then dozens of pages of notes. And I always try to ask myself, like, okay, when I put it down for a couple hours and I'm at dinner with my family, what is it that I want to talk about? Or if I go to bed the next night and I wake up the next morning, what is it that I'm still thinking about, right? The things that really stand out in that way. And I would say there's two things here. One of them is the thing we actually led the press release with. Everybody's been talking about do people think he's a dictator? We decided to just ask people outright. So we gave people two options to pick from about what do you think about Trump? And on one side, we said, do you believe that Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy? So, like a really strong statement on that side of the ledger. But to balance it, we gave people another statement. Or do you think he is a strong leader who should be given the power he needs to restore America's greatness? And then we also take, some kind of cautions where we actually rotated the order of those questions. So some people got one question first, some people got the other one first, so it wasn't tainted by which one you heard first, and we can kind of look at those things. But what we found is at the end of the day, it's a slim majority of the country, 52%, who believes that statement that Donald Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. And it's actually only 44% who says he's a strong leader who should be given the power he needs to restore American greatness. So like some like little ray of hope that this is the power grab, the disregard for the Constitution, the dismissal of due process, like all the things we've talked about through these 100 days, that some of that is really sinking in. The other one that has really stayed with me, we've asked various versions of this question, but it goes to what Jamar was talking about. One of the darkest moments in our history was where you were visiting, Jamar, right? Where we decided to put, and it was mostly Japanese, but it was also Italian and German residents that got put in internment camps as well, but by far more Japanese. And some of those Japanese were actually U.S. citizens. We often forget that got put in these internment camps. And so we asked a question about whether the federal government should place immigrants who are in the country illegally in internment camps guarded by the U.S. military until they can be deported. So we tried to kind of ask the kind of harshest version of this question. It's only about a third of Americans. It's 35%. I say only. It's kind of heartbreaking to see it's 35% of Americans who agree with that statement. But here's the really dangerous part of it. It's 62% of Republicans and 56% of white evangelical Protestants that say, yeah, I'm down with that. We can go right back to that dark, terrible moment in our history, and we think that's good. It's worth noting that there's no other religious group in which a majority says that, but white Catholics and white mainline Protestants are essentially divided on this question. So they're not strongly opposed. They're just kind of perplexed about where they should be on a question like this. So I think it's those two questions, one that's a little hopeful, one that scares me and kind of keeps me up at night.
Thank you for that breakdown, Robbie. And for folks who haven't been keeping track, he did put a couple of links in the chat. So you can go to the actual report from PRRI.org as well as Robbie's Substack and get his initial take on the data. And I like the way you framed that, Robbie. You talked about one thing that gave you hope and another that was a bit concerning. So maybe we can continue that. Kristen, as you looked at the data, do you have two of those two things, something that maybe gave you a hope or like, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised at that, and something that maybe weighed you down again or is like red flashing light for you?
Oh, let me think. I was thinking more in terms of my own perspective on these first
Yeah,
100
or just,
days.
yeah, totally. Doesn't have to be the data. Yeah.
Which intersects with the data as well, I think. But I was just seeing, and I don't think you saw it when you're talking, Robbie. There was a question in the chat that I think is specific to the survey, and that is the question of, do you, when you run these surveys, PRRI, do you go back to the same like 5,300 people, or is it just
Boom.
kind of abroad? So trying to get a tracking change over time. If you could just speak a little bit to the methodology there.
Yeah, real quickly. So, for all the data nerds out there, you can go to the website and you can download the questionnaire. So, in the questionnaire has not only every question we asked in the order that we asked it with the script, so exactly what the respondents saw, but it also has a big, long, multi-page methodology statement. So you can, really nerd out if you want to. But the short answer is that we conduct this survey among a random probability sample, and we get a fresh sample every time we do a major survey for the most part. So this is 5,300 and some change respondents that are randomly selected. We use a company called Ipsos to do the sampling. They actually recruit people by mail using the U.S. Postal Service kind of massive thing. So everybody has an equal chance of being invited to participate in the survey. We conduct the survey online, so it's anonymous and online survey. So even when we're asking about sensitive things, there's not a human interviewer involved. They're seeing it in the privacy on their home. And we also provide them, this is also important for people who are low income or may not have great internet access. The way we do this, we actually provide them internet access if they don't have it, and a tablet or a device to take the survey on if they don't have that as well. So that helps to kind of even out the kind of access problems that you have, particularly in urban areas or among kind of lower income folks. So that's every time we get a fresh survey of folks. Every now and then we'll do a tracking survey where we deliberately go back to the same people, but for the most part, it's a fresh batch every time we do it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I can tell that, I mean, you're so animated, just like we are when we talk about the archives. So
Oh, I love the nerdy stuff. Yeah, English and
you
Spanish, and all of that. Yeah.
you could go on and on,
Yes,
right?
I could. Yeah. If you don't stop me, I might. But
Yeah. So, okay, responding both to the survey and to the first 100 days, where I'm at, and my general response to the survey tracks very much with what you were just highlighting there, Robbie. On the one hand, when I read all of those data points, I'm thinking the majority, and in many cases, the strong majority of Americans do not like what's happening. The majority of Americans do not support many of the things that this administration is doing. And yet, you move over to the Republican Party and you do see majorities. And that is the party that is in power. And that is the party that is doing everything to consolidate more power. Right. And so that's this kind of back and forth. But and when I speak on this or write on this, I'm always trying to find that balance, right? This isn't a doomsday scenario because my goodness, we have the numbers, we just have to mobilize, right? We need to use the power that we have to push back and to protect our democracy. Because the powers that be on the other side know exactly how to consolidate that power, right? And so this is kind of the state I find myself between, and looking at those numbers really reinforce that. The other thing, which we may talk about more or not, is, and you alluded to this, the white evangelicals, right? Without fail, topping the charts on all of the worst things. A little bit opinion there. My opinion, the worst things that this administration is doing. White evangelicals are not just tolerating this; they are not holding their noses here for the umpteenth time. You have to say that they are enthusiastically supporting all of these measures, and this is exactly what they voted for. And I think anecdotally too, I know when I wrote on that on my Substack this week, and a number of people were commenting, yes, it is. This is when you talk with folks, they say, no, this is what I voted for. And so I know that, wrote a book on it. And at the same time, I don't know, seeing those numbers in this survey, it was devastating. It was sickening to see that, just in black and white there. I'll say that. Otherwise, first 100 days, something that I will confess surprised me, and not in a good way, was is the lack of coordinated opposition politically, institutionally, across various sectors of society. I honestly expected better of our people, of our people, meaning the people who are not happy with how things are going, and particularly among those with power. Right. And I know this has been a theme over the last couple of months, but it just seems like the people with the most power, the institutions with the most power, are the most reluctant to use that power, fearing that they might lose a little of what they have. The flip side to that, I will say what is surprising to me is that the sense I'm getting as people are waking up, because people are waking up slowly, but people are waking up. What I'm sensing for just ordinary folks as they are becoming alert to what is happening and to the dangers, that's where I see courage. And that's where I see people saying, put me in. What can I do? I'm seeing people speaking out now that haven't been speaking out for years. Right. And so I think that's the energy that I would love to, find ways to channel. And so disappointment on the one hand, but it really is, nobody's coming to save us. I think that's true. And
Mm.
so we really have to dig deep.
That's helpful insight. And yes, broader reflections on the first 100 days. That's one of the reasons why we did this on Wednesday instead of our typical Thursday, sort of mark the occasion. And 100 days, what a long 1,000 days this 100 days has been. um this is one of the things that I dreaded most leading up to the 2024 presidential election, was that if he won, we go back to what we experienced 2016 to 2020, which is daily
Right.
nation shaking, global shaking news, oftentimes by social media post. Oftentimes the news that is coming the current day is the news that's contradicting the announcement that came the previous day. And this sense of which way is up in this constant fire hose. And I longed for the days when you did not have to pay attention to every single thing the president or the administration did, because you trusted it at least minimally to operate according to established norms, the rule of law, things of that nature. And one of the things I dreaded was this constant sense of sort of anxiety. Like, there's not a day that goes by when someone in some context says, "Did you hear about blank?" Increasingly, I'm like, "No, I didn't," because there's just so much to keep up with. So that's just an aside. As I think about, I think this PRI point is a good jumping PRI report is a good jumping off point. I was dismayed from this data point. This is about, oh, the headline is probably positive. Most Americans reject the idea that discrimination against Christians or
Mm.
white Americans has become as big a problem versus other groups, which, great. Water is wet, and it's nice to know that a majority of people agree. So a specific bullet point under that heading: over half Americans, 51% overall, 75% Democrat, 27% of Republicans agree with the idea that generations of slavery and discrimination against Black people and Native Americans have given white people unfair economic advantages. So 51% overall agree, with three-quarters of Democrats agreeing there's a historical unfair advantage, right? But there's still 45% who disagree. And when I think about that number and what that means, it essentially means that centuries of slavery with no reparations and no remuneration, post emancipation, a century nearly of Jim Crow, which means not just you can't buy property through redlining, you can't get promoted in certain jobs, you can't even have certain jobs, you can't join certain unions. All of these have economic implications and ramifications, not to mention the social aspects. Martin Luther King Jr. has this very poignant story where he's talking about seeing the heartbreak in his daughter's eyes when she realizes she can't go to this amusement park because of her race, because of her skin color. And those kind of harder to measure impacts, right? And you have 45% of Americans who say all that's in the past. It has no bearing on the present. We're at a level playing field. The implications of which, for many, are likely, well, we don't need diversity, equity, and inclusion. It should all be merit based. We should be a colorblind society. And part of that comes from not understanding or being or refusing to admit the way the past continues to bear on the present in very pernicious ways to lots of different marginalized people, but particularly in this question, Black people and Native Americans. So that's heartbreaking, given all of the information we have at our fingertips and all of the work that all of us do to educate people. One
Yeah.
of the things,
Shamar,
yeah,
just
go ahead.
one quick thing too is to note is that that number actually went up a little bit at the height agreement with basically, I mean, this is essentially, do you believe structural racism exists? Is really what that question is asking, right? And that number actually went up after George Floyd and at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement and has trickled back down among white Americans since that time. There's been some retrenching on that number. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you made bad news worse. But it's better to have all the facts and all the data. So yeah, we've still got work to do there. Another something that, in a sideways way, kind of encouraged me, and part of it's petty. It says while just 4 in 10 Americans have favorable views of Trump, fewer view either Vice President J.D. Vance or Elon Musk favorably.
So this was your cheerful point, Jamar?
I'm glad. Yes. One, it sort of tracks with what we know about JD Vance. I mean, who's cheering this guy on, right? But the reason why it gave me a little sliver, I wouldn't say of hope, but let's say it's a strategic opportunity that we can leverage. I saw online folks saying, well, we shouldn't even try to impeach Trump because you'll just get JD Vance even if it works, right? To which I say, JD Vance does not have the diabolical charisma of Trump. So what we're seeing right now is, you know, maybe if I'm looking too much on the bright side, I would say is tenuously held together by a cult of personality centered around this very anomalous figure named Donald Trump. Now, the sentiment has always been there. It's been growing. It's been organizing. We know that, but it really did take this person and personality to bring all that together in a way that could win elections and continue to steamroll over our norms and over the numbers of people who oppose what he's doing. And so, this idea that even as Trump has historically low numbers for this period in his presidency, even fewer support J.D. Vance, to me says if for some reason we can get him out of office, which I'm not crossing my fingers that we can. But if for some reason that were the case, JD Vance isn't a Donald Trump. And there's no one else on the scene who's a Donald Trump. So I'm not saying in a simplistic fashion that, well, we get him off the scene and everything's going to go back to the way it was. Number one, I hope it doesn't go back to the way it was. I hope it gets way, way better. And number two, those impulses will still be there and they'll continue to search for whoever or whatever can get them back into power. What I do think is it'll be much, much harder without a Trump. I do think that is the case. And so, you know, maybe one day when he's off the scene, there is more of a strategic weakness that we can get in and exploit to restore and strengthen democracy. So that's what I'll say. This 100 days has been incredibly long. I'm already tired, but there are a few things that we can be looking at that maybe can advance the cause of democracy. Diana, what did you think?
Well, I'm actually glad that I kind of am last in this circle because I was having trouble thinking about, what is the thing I find worst and the place I'm finding some hope or more positive. I think the thing that I'm finding worse, I'll go there first, is the casual cruelty of everyday life. And this is a theme that's gone through the last 100 days from when, and we've talked about this and any number of times, the attack on empathy, the dismissal of the idea of compassion, the ridicule of love of neighbor. And so there's all this theoretical stuff that we've talked about, but the way it's been manifested in policy, and that we see this on an almost hourly basis in the news, everything from, oh, let's send 4-year-olds on cancer treatment back to countries where they've never lived, let's deport 2-year-olds, let's, the dehumanization of people. Just this week there were two things that I found, a couple of us have used the word haunting, uh, two things that sort of will become, I think, almost iconic negative icons for me about this administration. And one was the putting the faces of people who had been deported on posters lining the
Mhm.
White House fences and driveways. Um, I don't know if you've seen the images, but I've also been watching Wolf Hall over on PBS, and there is the Henry VIII and sort of all the medieval sort of tyrant kings of that period. Um, you know, when they had an enemy, they could just kill him, and what you would do was put their head on a spike or a pike, at the gates of the town, so that everybody who walked by all the time would see what happens to traitors. And so these posters outside of the White House
Mm.
seemed to me like they were almost a contemporary version of the head on the pike, um, practice of medieval barbarism, that one would have thought that we might have left behind with Henry VIII, or at least with Adolf Hitler. But no, we got it. We've got it back, in this other form, and that, the cruelty of that is unspeakable. And then there's this quieter, kind of less in your face cruelty that really struck me, um, today, is when I saw it. I don't know, might have happened yesterday, but Trump had that cabinet meeting where they all, were talking about the 100 days and all their successes, and there was back and forth with reporters, and there were a lot of questions about the economy. And we don't talk about the economy very often because I don't think we're very, it's not our training, it's not where we go immediately. But in the course of that question, those questions, someone said, "Well, what about your tariffs and Christmas?" And Trump went off on this rant where he started saying, "Well, what do you mean Christmas? The kids," and the reporter said, "Well, kids won't have their toys at Christmas." And Trump literally said, "Well, I don't understand what you mean at all, because maybe some little girl got 30 dolls on a regular Christmas, and this time she's only going to get two. And what kind of big deal is that? Is that you go from having 30 dolls to only having two dolls?" And at first it seems like that's just dumb, and that he doesn't understand economics. And also he admitted that his tariffs are going to cause a decline in the capacity of American families to have a decent life. I mean, that was basically what he admitted there. But the cruelty of that, I mean, obviously, in my church, when we give out, every year we do a Christmas tree thing, and we get little lists of children who live in local shelters or served by local social service agencies. And this last Christmas, the kids that I got, their Christmas presents were shoes. I mean, we're not even talking two dolls. The number of Americans who live in the kind of poverty where they can't even give their children socks, underwear, and shoes for Christmas. I mean, that's what that's part of the reality of the economic life in America. is there are that many people who live in that much poverty. And to have the president of the United States sit in the Oval Office and make a joke about children who won't get a little girl who won't get 30 dolls, but only two. Like, honestly, I've always been a generous Santa in these sort of circumstances. I never gave my child 30 dolls on any Christmas day. I mean, the fact that he can just sit there and say that is this ignorant cruelty and this inability to connect with the lives of real people, that I find the heartlessness of it on a daily basis to be grinding. Um, and so
Yeah.
that's my really
Yeah.
bad
I think if you slow that down, Diana, that's exactly right. Like I think we get those little windows like that where you ask like, okay, so what's going on that's the scene he conjures in his head? It's like a complete lack of connection to anything human.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Robbie. Like this lack of humanity and lack of basic human connection. It's absent there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely inexcusable among people who call themselves Christian. Like, this is so far more basic and foundational than politics or partisanship. It's all the way back in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible about the image of God. And you don't have to agree on whatever policy recommendation is going on to say that, putting up posters on fences, some of them with targets and kind of scope bullseyes on, there's nothing that comports with a Christian faith in doing that, no matter what your political persuasion. Um, so that's very dismal. And one of the questions that often comes up and that I've been thinking about again and again as I ponder this lack of empathy, this lack of humanity, where does it come from and where is it getting reinforced? And so I think, Robbie, there were some questions about news sources in here, or at least some data around that.
Hey,
And
can I
yeah.
click in
Oh,
my
I'm
optimism
sorry. Yeah,
views?
yeah, go for
That's
it.
okay, because it builds on what you're just saying, Jamar. And that it, actually, the thing that made me feel the worst is actually the thing and that showed up in miserable data in Robbie's survey, was that no, Christians shouldn't behave that way. And particularly white Catholics and white mainline Protestants. I don't even try with white evangelicals anymore, but white Catholics and white non-evangelical Protestants, white mainliners, they know the difference.
Hmm.
And even though Robbie's data shows them still majority, thin majorities, but majorities nevertheless, supporting Trump, if every priest and lay teacher in the Catholic Church and every pastor in every mainline congregation got up in his and her pulpits and started preaching about this stuff, those sermons could potentially have a huge effect.
Hmm.
If there were enough brave clergy who were willing to have some of their people run out the door and not pay their tithes anymore, simply by talking about cruelty, humanity, living up to baptism vows, treating others with kindness and respect, and then running it right up against the news, because every day, every hour, there are illustrations of it, you could change the world.
Hmm.
And so to me, that is the point of real hope, is that a regular Lutheran pastor in some small Midwestern town with a divided congregation, if he or she was brave enough on a cycle of Sundays for maybe just one season of the Christian calendar, they could change their congregation. I literally believe that to the bottom of my heart. And that's actually what I'm trying to dedicate my time to, is the shifting of those numbers in those two categories, Robbie.
Mm.
And the shift could be small enough to make all of the difference as to not only the future of America, but this is resonating throughout the globe. And if you want a mission, it's in your congregation, white pastors of white churches. Convert those people and it will be different. Don't sit back and complain and don't be afraid. And find in your congregation who agrees with you even before you begin, and see if they'll give you more money to keep your doors open if you're worried about a donor who will leave.
Diana, could I add too? I was reading a number of the comments in the chat at the beginning of this episode, saying that their pastors were not addressing this at all,
Mm,
and other comments saying they actually challenged a deacon or challenged a pastor, and they came through. So even if you
Yeah.
are not a pastor, if you are part of a religious congregation, you have agency here. Talk
Yes,
to
you
your
do.
pastor, give them the challenge. And I think in this moment, there are a lot of people who are ready to be challenged and just
Right.
waiting for the thing to do. So you can help people find that thing to do. And guess what? If your pastor doesn't want to do this, you can start a group. You can start a study. You can use Jamar's Road to Ruin. There's all sorts of resources out there. You don't even need something that is all, packaged. Just get together and talk about things and remind yourselves who you are. And I think that's another thing that we need to remember, that scholars of authoritarianism will tell you about the effects that take hold within populations on a very personal level, that senses of morality shift, senses of identity shift very quickly. These things start to erode. And so, part of our task in this moment is to push back politically and to show up and to do all these things and to try to change minds and consolidate this into a movement. But a huge part of our task also is staying human, right?
mm,
Staying
mm.
human, holding to our values in the midst of this struggle. And each and every one of us can do something, and it works so much better in my experience doing that in community. And if you aren't a part of that community, you've got to start a community, and I think people are ready to join you.
The
This is
first ethical thing I ever learned in Methodist Sunday school as a child was to be nice. And honestly, I just want more nice Methodists right now. Get out there and think about what it means to be nice. And it does not mean putting the faces of immigrants on posters like their heads on the pike by Henry VIII. And I'm kind of ashamed of my own denomination that he did that, and that's where we started. But at least I had thought we weren't doing it now. But yeah, be nice. Just start there. Simple. A kindness revolution. Just go with that. The most basic second grade Sunday school stuff. People need to be reminded of that right now.
I have a couple of questions for y'all on the mic, but also we do want to speak to your questions as we've been doing throughout. But there is a Q&A function. We've got two questions in the Q&A function right now. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in there. One of my questions is to you, Robbie, about data around news
Yeah.
sources. The other question I have is to you, Diana, a practical question you said about start at your local church, and I would love to hear you flesh that out a bit more.
Oh, news sources. Yeah. So we ask consistently about television news sources, particularly because it has such a powerful impact. And what we're seeing is it used to just be Fox News, right? And that used to be the kind of epicenter on the right. But now there's actually this whole other cottage industry of One American News, Newsmax, and other groups that have actually kind of overshadowed Fox News and even to the right of Fox News. And we're really seeing now that growth there that is you can really see the difference between, we're talking in theological space many times here, but if you think about like formation and character, things that Christians take seriously, right? It is what you feed yourself, right? That forms you. That's what we understand to be discipleship. And you can see that in the numbers. You know, people who say they most trust Fox News or most trust far right media sites, they look different than people who say they trust anything else, any other media source, and that includes even among Republicans. We can find 20-point gaps between Republicans who say they most trust Fox News or far right news and Republicans who trust any other news source, right? So there it is like forming Republicans, and where you really see it is in the meanness and the cruelty. That's where you really see it. So militarized internment camps, ideas that immigrants are invading the country, this kind of great replacement theory stuff, Christian nationalism, inhospitable views toward immigrants and others, denials of systemic racism. It's all those things, right, where you can really see this impact of the kind of right wing, media sphere, Fox, and even further to the right. So that's absolutely, still playing a role in forming Christians that look like that.
Discipleship by Fox News,
Yeah.
unfortunately, is still happening. And I put in the chat, I wonder what it would look like, and y'all out there listening will have to pioneer this, but what it would look like to do a Fox News fast among your folks who are supporting this regime, or at least show them the data. Like, why do you think there's up to 20-point gaps within Republicans due to the different news sources they're trusting or accessing? That might be an interesting experiment as we try to resist this regime. But Diana, I think you're putting your finger on the pulse for a lot of people here, which is, the question, what can we do and what can we do right where we are? And I love your passion, and you're absolutely right about churches and local congregations. You had weeks and weeks ago this wonderful idea that I've never forgotten and I've repeated with attribution many times. Churches should have all the banned books in their libraries, right? So is there more of that? Because I think that's something that we can really grasp onto, and to say, what can I do in my local faith community?
Yeah. And can you address Diana too? Because I know I've heard you do it so beautifully. Just it's right adjacent to that, this idea that politics should somehow be excluded from the church, right, and outside the congregational walls.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that people have to understand is kind of, what's their congregation about, what its tenor is. So, like the banned book idea, that works for more liberal congregations. And every time I have suggested that, like at a UCC church or a very, kind of a lefty Episcopal church, they go for it. I literally think I've seen book drives start, when I walked out the door. And so that's a kind of a practical on the ground idea that appeals to a certain kind of congregation. But then you're going to have congregations that are more mixed. And in those congregations, one of the things that well, there's sort of two approaches I would take. One is, if you like the four of us, um, have a conversation with the leaders in your congregation, and take the pastor out privately, or the Christian ed director, or the person who does spiritual life, and just say, hey, look, everything that's going on in the world right now has me so upset. And I am actually, and tell them something like this: I am actually thinking about leaving the church because the church is not addressing the issues that matter the most to my heart. And I come away on Sunday not feeling like I'm given any capacity to address the most important issues in the world, but I come away feeling angry or weaker or sadder. And that is actually one of the things that people who have tried to push congregations in more right-wing directions have done to pastors through the year, is that they complain to the pastor. And they say, they make it a threat. I'm going to leave
Mm.
if you don't do what I want. Now, I don't want you to do that, but take the pastor out to lunch and say, this is actually hurting me now, and I no longer know what to do. And I think that you fundamentally agree with me, and you see this biblically in the same way I do. How can we address this together? And so I really think that getting clergy kind of on the same page with people in congregations who are longing for more, and not just having the people long for more get angry about it, and walk out the door, but say, look, I want to be here with and for you. And when this all started many, many months ago, I made the suggestion that people who are more progressive or liberal or who don't like Trump, I don't care what the label is you put on it, you should be giving more money to your church right now. And you should make a very big deal about it with your pastor that you're giving money because you expect a lot out of the church right now. You want more rather than less. And so that kind of, you're not doing it as a threat, you're doing it as a support, an encouragement to push the clergy in a direction of courage. And the more people they know are with them, the braver they get. And then the better they're going to be able to handle the criticism that will inevitably come their way. So that's my first approach, is to create a real alliance within the congregation of people who want to see this moment addressed with this kind of moral clarity. And that's what we're looking for. Not just you're going to turn everybody into a bunch of Democratic voters. You're looking for moral clarity in line with the teachings of Jesus that speaks to the moment. And that goes to Robbie's question about addressing politics. If you have moral clarity, it actually becomes a political conversation,
Hmm.
because the most important political questions right now are all moral ones. And so if you say you're avoiding political questions, what you're actually doing is avoiding moral questions. And that is guaranteed to drive people away from church. And so many folks all the time are saying, oh, what do we do to get the young people to come to church now? No young people want to come to church. Well, the truth of it is if you're saying we don't deal with politics in our church, what you're essentially putting on your sign is, hello, we will not deal with the issues that are most important to the emerging generations about saving the planet, making peace, or economic equality. And if you're a 27-year-old and you can't pay your rent, or you're worried that the world's going to fry, and you're thinking about, can I even have children? Um, and somebody says to you, oh, come to our church because we're really nice and we never talk about politics. You aren't going to go. It's just the way it is. You're literally telling people who are under 40 that you don't care about the issues that are the most present issues in their lives. And so, moral clarity, courage about addressing moral issues in ways that do indeed involve politics. That's your centrist moment. And if you're a pastor in a conservative congregation, well, God bless you. Just send me your phone number or your email address, and I'll be praying for you.
Hmm.
Because in that case, you're probably simply trying to hold people's hands and keep your own sanity. And that's a really hard job. And I know that there are some of you out there.
Thank
But
you
the
so much.
but the centrist congregations and the more liberal congregations, more open congregations, there's a real opportunity here. Take it.
And
Take
I
it.
love your point, Diana, of rather than threatening to, like, I'm pulling my resources, I'm taking my toys and walking away. It's the opposite. It's
That's
saying
right.
I'm giving more because the role of the church is so critical right now, and I know the pressures that you are under, and
Yep.
I am putting my resources to support you, to give you courage, and because I trust you to do good things with this, right? That's the conversation to be having. And that will be immensely more effective, I think, in this moment than a threat, even thinly veiled threat, to kind of pull those resources. I think, and it's also a much better spirit, right? That's,
Mhm.
we're building something positive. And in this moment, if people, what we need is, we need to embolden those who are already there, or and get those to act who already have that moral center.
Mhm.
You're not going to twist somebody's arm to get them to come over to the side, or a threat of losing funds, so okay, I guess, no, that's not what we're going for, right? We need the people who are ready to be all in and to give them that boost. And resources like that can absolutely give a pastor the boost to do what she or he already wanted to do.
And moral courage is contagious, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's
Mm.
the thing. And it's exciting. Like, God knows, like church can be boring, right? And like this gives, I think, too many always think of church as like, it's kind of just a, I don't know, you kind of give yourself this veneer of respectability. You get to hang out with people and drink coffee that you like. But like this gives a church something to do, right? And like to be active, to get out there and like actually live out our faith in ways that are a little bit risky, but that means that there's like life in it. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to see. And the last thing I'll say here and turn it back to you, Jamar, because then we're getting short on time. But the only post-mortem piece I wrote after the election was something I published at Time Magazine, and I called it "What White Christians Have Wrought." And just to Diana's point here, we should not be looking to Christians of color to save us from this moment. They are not the ones who got us here. So for those of us who look like me and Kristen and Diana, like, and we go to churches that look mostly like us, like it's up to us. Like we're the ones who got us here, and we're the ones who's going to get us out of here if there are enough of us to speak up.
There's a
Yeah.
really nice comment by Edward Bryan. I didn't want to miss it in the thread. And he said, I sort of kind of agree with Diana's approach. Thank you very much. That's nice of you. But as an African American who was formerly in a majority white congregation, that they had to leave because they didn't feel
Yeah.
safe, and they left loudly. And so I'm never about a one size fits all kind of solution. My suggestions were overall. And I do feel like that circumstance that he points out, that's one of the circumstances when it actually is important to make the big fuss and to make it when you're going out the door. Um, if you've tried and tried and tried and nothing else, and you don't feel safe, Jesus doesn't want you to be among people where you feel like that. And you should point that out as you leave. And that goes with what Robbie was just saying too, is that um yeah, and you got to adjudicate those things depending on your individual personal circumstances as well as those overall suggestions that I was giving.
So we've got a few questions here. Our folks on the mic, you can pick and choose which ones you want to address. Since all of these are very difficult, I'll start with Sophia's question. Do you know your schedule for releasing future podcasts? It was a weekly for the first 100 days, but wondering what it will be now. Thanks so much for helping us all feel more connected. It helps so much. First of all, thank you, Sophia. This doesn't happen without folks like you taking time out, tuning in, leaving comments and questions. You're truly strengthening us. So just understand this is a two-way thing between you all tuning in and us on the mics here. Thank you so much. The truth is, we are going to continue weekly for the next couple of weeks, but we have an in-person retreat. We'll think more strategically about what this looks like long term. And y'all know the story. We didn't set out with some strategic plan to start a podcast. As a
That
matter
was
of fact,
unscripted too, right?
that was totally unscripted. Uh, Kristen was the one who's like, no, no, never. I'll never do a podcast, and then she suggests it. So we're
I
blaming her
still wonder
slash
what,
applauding her.
yes, what I was thinking. I swore I was not going to do a podcast. And then what happened is exactly this. We got on a Zoom call to figure something out, and we had so much fun. And it was so good. So good to connect in this way and to compare notes. And we thought if this feels so good for the four of us, right, we need to invite other people into this space too. And that really is our origin story. So and we
That's
we
right.
meant to go through the election, then through the inauguration, and then we thought, well, we better stick with the first
Person.
100 days. So we are going to be in person with each other to actually
Yeah.
just talk through where we're at and where we're going next. But I've been hearing from many people about how meaningful this has been for you, and so thank you. We are definitely hearing that message from
Yeah.
many places.
And we just hit 10,000 people on the Substack newsletter. So thank you all for being a part of that as well.
That's really cool. All right, now y'all can take it away on the rest of our questions.
I'll do one real quick.
that.
It's about emergency powers. I do think this is really important. I keep coming back to this. So much of what Trump is doing, tariffs, invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, depends on his declaration of a state of national emergency, that the country literally has to declare the country's being invaded, right, by Venezuelan gangs in order to kind of get the Alien Enemies Act off the ground, declare that we're in some kind of economic emergency to get the tariffs. And all it would take actually is, again, those four Republicans in Congress to say, yeah, no, we're not really in a national emergency. And as soon as they undeclare national emergency, he actually loses those unilateral powers to do some of these more draconian things. So, there is a lever there to pull. We just can't find for Republicans who'd be willing to kind of pull that lever quite yet.
Someone in the questions asked about how we met. I think that's kind of a nice place to chat for a moment. Um, it was different, it'd be different for all of us because there's four of us, and so we have different stories. But the truth of it is, Robbie and I met first. I think that would have been long before
Yeah.
Kristen and Jamar were on our radar screen. So we met at the Washington National Cathedral.
They might have been in elementary school back when we met.
It's beginning to feel that way. We met at an event at the Washington National Cathedral. I know that I met Kristen at an Evangelical Women's Caucus meeting.
Christian Feminism Today, years ago.
Yeah, Christian Feminism Today. And there were some amazing folks there. And we had quite the conversation where we pulled aside and talked about we're both working with George Marsden. And Jamar, I only met through his words at first, and having publishers put things that he wrote in my hands and saying, do you have time to blurb this book? Or can you put this guy forward? And I'm really bad at blurbing and I pay more attention to putting people forward, kind of in these sorts of ways, online podcasts and stuff like that. But I don't think that Jamar and I actually met in person until this year, but we knew each other, and I just admired him from afar because he was such a troublemaker, and I thought, this is the guy I want to know. And then I found out that Robbie and Christian both knew you, so I was like, I'm coming aboard this.
I have a terrible memory for like first meetings. The one thing I do remember is meeting up with Robbie in the Mississippi Delta because so few people come down there. So he got to see Helena, Arkansas, where I lived for many, many years. And I think, did we go out and have a drink?
We did.
At Delta Dirt Distillery. So that's always cool. Yeah, when somebody comes to the Delta.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, Jamar and I go way back in the Christian historian circles. And I like to say I knew Jamar back before he even had a PhD. And but you never would have known it. I will tell you that much. And yeah, Diana already said we met at a Christian Feminism Today conference. That was maybe what
decade ago?
A decade ago. Yeah, I think it's around a decade ago. And then Robbie, we are kind of in social media spaces first. And then I just remember before I met you in person being incredibly intimidated because this is Robert P. Jones of PRRI. And oh my goodness.
Middle initial.
Yeah, and I'm 6'2" online.
Same here.
And then we started, I think Zoom calls and things like that. And it just kind of came more and more into each other's orbit.
Yeah, and I think, Kristen, when the paperback version of Jesus and John Wayne came out, we did a couple of conversations around that on Zoom that was kind of solidified it a little bit more. And then Diana was on the board. There was on the founding board of Public Religion Research Institute back in 2009. So yeah, we go back quite a ways. And yeah, I think Jamar, we kind of, two connections before we actually knew each other well was actually before that drink. You got asked to review my book in the New York Times.
Yes.
Oh,
got us both in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So before we really knew each other, so that we had that, you were very kind. I appreciate that. Back in the day. So anyway, I think we've just been fellow travelers, and like I said, just kind of, decided we should make it more formal, which has been great. Yeah.
I think that one of the funnier stories that I have about meeting any of you is that conversation that I was having with Kristen. And I mean, we really talked about a lot of stuff. And it was really, we went deep, personal, and fast in that long conversation at that conference. And I remember her telling me that she is working on this book where she might be calling me and asking me a couple questions. And I said, "Oh, what's the book about?" And she said, "Well, it's called Jesus and John Wayne." And I've never told you this, Kristen, but I sat there and I thought, "Oh, title like that, that's not gonna sell anything." Yeah, boo, Diana's stupid when it comes to packaging books and having titles.
Well, thank you for not weighing in at that point.
No, I wasn't gonna say anything, I wanted to encourage you.
You know how writers work. Yeah, yeah. Don't need critique at that stage.
Go ahead.
I was just saying,
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of shout out to Reverend Barber and
Yes.
Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, both of whom are other friends and fellow travelers who were
Yeah.
arrested in the Capitol this week, praying for mercy and not to cut off poor children's, health care and other education aids and other kinds of things like that, and were arrested in the U.S. Capitol rotunda for praying for those things. So so much for anti-Christian bias,
Mhm.
right? Being applied uniformly across the board.
Yeah, I'm glad I've seen a number of comments and questions popping up, and yes, in our internal chat, we're like, oh, we are definitely going to be talking about this. I know, these are friends of ours, and is a moral witness, and also, really surfacing that issue that Robbie mentioned. So here we have an administration, Department of Justice sending out a press release on this new anti-Christian bias task force, right? And all these flimsy examples of supposed anti-Christian bias. We talked about that last week here on the podcast. Uh, so, if you look at those examples that they gave, this one is, should be right up there, if not, certainly at the top of that list. And as here are Christians, pastors praying in the rotunda, the same space where Sean Foyt has done his little worship things, much more, I would, imagine obtrusively than these folks praying about the budget, right? And yet they are arrested. So now imagine if this had been on the other side, right? If the roles had been reversed here, the outcry of the bias and the persecution of Christians. But no, like, so why not? Why does this Christian witness not count in their book? What do they mean by Christian? What do they mean by anti-Christian bias, right? And this gets us into some really critical theological questions and constitutional questions, right? And so I just a shout out to Dr. Barber, to Jonathan, to the other folks present, because they took a stand and they put their bodies on the line. They did. It's one thing, I know that getting arrested isn't anything new to these folks. They're, religious leaders and activists, but times have changed, and there is a heightened risk when you put yourself out in that way. And it's not clear what happens in this political moment. And so I'm just grateful to them for that witness, and I'm grateful for the way that they have surfaced these absolutely critical questions right now around Christianity and around what really counts here, and what protections can we expect, or should we no longer expect?
And the final, I think, sort of point to think about that Barber and Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove piece was there were a lot of other people who were there, including several friends of ours who, like Holly Berkeley Fletcher,
Mhm.
who was just there with them. She wasn't praying; she was standing to the side. She's Substacker, writes A Zebra Without Stripes, and Jack Jenkins, who's a religion reporter at Religion News Service. Both of them were in this room. They both reported to me the same thing, and that is they got kicked out. before Barber and the other two people who were there, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, I can't remember who the other one was. Jonathan Sawyer, I think his name was. I don't, whoever the third person was, I didn't know him. But so before the cuffs went on or anything happened, everyone else was removed from the room. So that means that Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove and William Barber both came out later and said they were treated very kindly by the police. So it wasn't an issue of roughing them
Yeah.
up. But it was clear that there's some change of policy going on where they limited transparency to the actions that they were taking vis-a-vis these protesters, these prayer protesters. So that's a little worrisome. Um, why? What was that all about? What were they trying to hide? What might have happened if it wasn't someone quite as famous as William Barber? We don't know, but that concerned me when both Holly and Jack said the same thing. That other people in the room were actually excluded from the room and couldn't see what was happening, and that really worried them.
And this is something we've said from the start with the supposed anti-Christian bias task force. Who's Christianity? And of course, we all know the answer to that because it's been abundantly clear. It's a white Christian nationalist version of Christianity that has much more to do with power and control than the way of Jesus. But here with these arrests, we get a stark and stunning example. As was mentioned, times have changed. And so when I first heard about it, my anxiety was up because this is not business as usual. And then, especially removing journalists, removing truth tellers, removing observers. I posted on social media that injustice spawns in secrecy. Part of the reason why they're not only incarcerating these supposed immigrants who are breaking the law, they're shipping them to another country is because what happens to them is a secret. We cannot see it. And then the abuse has the potential to get much, much worse. So these are very fraught times. These are things that we need to be paying attention to. And just one other point on that whole episode is this came out about the same time as when Sean Foyt posted a video of worship happening in the White House. He was up in some room in the White House playing guitar. There's dozens of people there singing a song many of us have sung in church, some Christian contemporary music song. Hands in the air, a lot of phones in the air too. So we got praise for a photo op here. Um, Paula White's in the room, a lot of the usual suspects there. And it just reminded me of Amos chapter 5, the verse that says, "Let justice roll down." But the preceding verses say, "I despise your religious festivals. I hate your worship because you're not doing justice." And they're sitting up there singing and praying and supposedly praising with hands upraised while people are being kidnapped off the streets, while the rule of law is being completely subverted, while they're dehumanizing people actively in dozens of ways. And to me, that verse from Amos 5 is absolutely applicable. That kind of worship is a stench in the nostrils of a God who loves righteousness and justice. So the juxtaposition of these Christians praying for the poor, praying for mercy, being arrested, and these other people who, in the name of Christianity, are praising and worshiping and celebrating while all these abuses happen. So
That sounds like a benediction to me.
I was going to say, not to leave on
Amen.
a downer,
No,
but
that's not a
let justice
downer.
roll down. Um, so thank y'all for joining us. We so look forward to our monthly lives. We will get back to you as soon as we know what the future of this Convocation Unscripted will be. But do know that it's in all of our hearts to continue to serve, to continue to be voices and try to bear the light of truth on our situation. And we're so thankful to you getting us over 10,000 subscribers on our Substacks. Of course, subscribe to our individual Substack. Everybody's got such really good stuff that they're posting, articles that they're posting on their Substack. So please do subscribe to that. Let your friends know about this podcast. If it's helping you, it's going to help someone else. So do share this episode, share our Substack. And of course, we will see you next time on the Convocation Unscripted.